Hello, Martin.
Hi, Paul.
So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this individual executive member decision. My name's Callum Wernham. I'm going to be clerking the meeting. So with me in the room, we have John Kaiser, who's the deputy leader of the council. And we also have Matt Gould, who's the team leader for traffic and road safety. There is also a member of the public in the room with us as well. Joining us virtually today, we have Pauline Jorgensen, who's the executive member for highways and transport, and Martin Heath, who's the senior specialist for traffic management and road safety. And with that, I will hand over to you, Martin, just to run us through some aspects of the report.
Thanks, Callum. Can you hear me? Yep, good. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to seek approval to conclude a traffic regulation order making process, which revises the existing off-street car parks order following advertisement of the proposed changes and a review of the responses received during that period, the statutory objection period. There were a total of 49 responses. 17 of those were formal objections, and under the legislation we're obliged to consider those, and we have done that and provided a response, an officer's response, which is attached as an appendix to the report. The recommendation is that the executive member considers the objections and the officer's responses and either instructs us to proceed with the making of the order or and to write to all objectors to advise them of that decision, or instructs us to abandon the order making process at this stage before it proceeds to be made.
Okay.
I can give a bit more background on the report in terms of the purpose of the changes, if you think that would be helpful, Pauline.
I don't want to. I mean, I've read all the objections, Martin, and I think they fall into three categories.
Yep.
There's quite a few comments about California Crossroads.
Sure.
There's quite a lot of comments about car parking periods and charging for car parking periods. And there's quite a lot of comments on charging for Sundays and evenings. I think are the three areas that there are comments. I noticed one of the comments was actually duplicates. So you've got one less objection you thought you had, but
okay.
It doesn't matter. It's as I say, it's the same thing. It got two slightly different answers. So I wonder if we start with the car parking periods. I mean, the responses from the officers indicate that this doesn't change any of the charging, it's just changing the car parking periods. Can you confirm that and also explain why we want to change the car parking periods?
Yes, so this order creates a structure which breaks down the parking periods slightly differently to the way that the public will be used to them. For example, going to a public car park now, there'll be parking periods of in some cases 30 minutes, up to an hour, 1 to 2 hours, and 2 to 4 hours, and so on. This order breaks them down into hourly segments, individual hourly segments, which will enable us in the future to provide a much more flexible system so that members of the public can actually select the exact amount of time that they require for parking rather than a broader period. The second reason for extending the hours of operation of the car parks was because during lockdown we had a number of instances of antisocial behaviour, and our car parks operations tended to stop at 6 p.m. And one of the comments that was raised in dealing with the antisocial behaviour from Thames Valley Police was that we should try and use car park powers to deal with that in the evening, and we weren't able to do that. So that's the reason for extending it to 10 p.m. And also some of that behaviour was at weekends.
So what? Just let me say. So what you're saying is that the extension of the car parking hours is not to do with charging for those extra hours. It's to do with making sure that the car park is active at those hours in terms of legislation, which means that we can then enforce the parking.
It is, yes. So,
antisocial behaviour.
Yes, yeah. So in the evening periods, as it stands now, you can enter a car park and leave a vehicle, and there's no record of your vehicle being there. You don't have to register it. You don't have to get a ticket for it or anything like that. So we'll do that in under this new order. We'll be able to do that in all car parks, and that will deter people, antisocial behaviour particularly, because they won't want to register a vehicle as having been there. We also have CCTV that's been put into a number of car parks, which can support antisocial behaviour enforcement, but it's not something that we're empowered to do anything with. We can only provide that information to the police should they request it as evidence.
Okay, thank you. So I think that covered that one. So what you're saying is this doesn't change the charging. What it does is enable us to enforce antisocial behaviour outside the hours of the charging.
It is. It makes the car parks operational periods, and also changes the periods available to the public. So, as say, at the moment, a member of the public may enter a car park, determine that they're not quite sure how long they might stay. It's around about 2 hours. It might be a little bit more, and they may end up then paying for 4 hours of parking just to cover themselves. And actually, they only stay there for between 2 and 3 hours. So by creating a new band of 2 to 3 hours, it will enable us to deal with that and to allow them to choose that period for parking.
Okay, and the second thing, I think you've covered 2 of those now. Then the third thing that seemed to come up a lot was California Crossroads. I wonder if you could explain that one.
So California Crossroads, a common parking problem there is that the car park is full of people, long stay people, people that are parked there all day long, and that makes it difficult for others to get in. And so there's parking in and other car parks around, private car parks in some cases, and on street. And the limitation on the parking period to park for a maximum of 1 hour, and then to have to go away and not be able to return within 2 hours, is there to improve the turnover of car parking spaces and availability of car parking spaces, which should also then support the local businesses there, particularly the retail businesses there, so that the customers that visit can, the more customers can visit, and improve the number of, or the amount of business that they can sustain.
And again, it doesn't change the parking charging.
No, there's no changes to parking charges.
Okay. So the other bits in this paper were to do with removing car parks that no longer exist, from our point of view.
Yes, there's removing some car parks, and also separating what will be our purely park and ride car parks, and separating those into an order of their own, because they will need to have their own set of controls because of the way they operate, which will be different from normal car parks.
Okay. And various other tidying up things like the height limit. Is there anything I've missed?
No, just to go back to a number of the objections were about changing car parking charges, and a couple of the comments related to this process having removed the opportunity for consultation should any future change to parking charges be required. It doesn't do that. There will always be an opportunity for consultation. The decision whether to change parking charges has always been with members, with elected members, and the decision to make changes will be based on some form of consultation or understanding of public expectation. So, but what will happen in every case is that a statutory notice of variation will be published in order to make those changes to car parking charges. So it doesn't change the democratic position for individual users, for members of the public. The elected members have always been able to change parking charges. In fact, that's why parking charges haven't changed for the past 5 years, because members have decided not to. But there's not been any consultation on whether they should or shouldn't in that period. They've been able to do that. So it was just to cover that period, that point really, because as I say, I think a lot of the objections were misguided in that respect.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I think the legalistic wording didn't help the understanding.
Yeah, and we are tied to legalistic wording in some respects, but we will continue to try and improve the way we say these things.
Yeah, and we're going to write back to the individual objectors, are we?
All objectors will write to, yes, and we could also write to all those that passed
Make comments as well. That would be good. Yeah,
we have written to a number of those already, actually, because quite a few were asking for increased information or different information about what it implied and so on.
Good. Okay, thanks, Martin. Callum.
Yes, Pauline.
Has the member of the public got any questions?
These are not questions. These are just comments about the process that was involved. I fully understand the process involved. My previous job involved withdrawal of implied permissions to certain premises, so I understand what is going on here. These are comments, really. You mentioned it right at the end there about the language used in the TRO. I think that is what has generated all the comments. Now, I've read the agenda tonight, and the agenda makes it perfectly clear what is going on. If maybe, so I don't know whether you can put something in that, or to explain it, but what you've got in the agenda would have killed off 90% of those objections.
Yeah.
I was going to ask also, could you have responded individually? I know you're going to respond to all those comments now, but could they be responded to before this meeting, or is this just the way the process works? You've got to have this meeting first and then you respond. I don't know.
I don't know either. So
right, that's okay. That's
Callum,
okay.
Callum might know. Callum?
Pardon, what was that? Whether the comments could be responded to prior to the meeting?
It's a bit late now, but for next time, if we get comments.
Well, I would have thought that would be an operational decision rather than a constitutional one, so it would be down to Martin, I would have thought. Okay.
So it sounds like Martin responded to the questions, but didn't necessarily respond to the comments. And yeah, I think that's a good point. Thank you, which we will take into account again in the future.
The other thing was that when I spoke to Democratic Services, Mr. Glencross,
yeah,
he was unaware that these regulations had been published in the car parks, which presumably, reading the agenda, that was what was supposed to happen, because that's where I picked them up. I saw these laminated sheets in the car parks. Is that the normal process? Lovely. And I'm fully aware about where the fees are changed. There's also a meeting in February where you decide all your fees. Is that correct? Yeah. And then if presumably before that, there's notice that these things have happened and objections and so forth.
So I understand that the process for changing fees and charges doesn't have to be in February. It could be any time, but it is an executive decision. So it's a public decision, not a private decision.
Well, that was all. I don't have objections. I was just sort of commenting on the process. I found as I say, the TRO very wordy and hard to understand, and me with a small legal background.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think actually, Martin, it might be useful if we're going to respond to people's emails, if we actually attach the paper that came, the IEMD paper, so that people can read it, because I think it's a lot easier to follow than the TRO as well. Would that be possible?
Yeah, well, sort of. And just to cover that point, in terms of responding to objectors prior to the IMD meeting, we wouldn't normally do that, just not so as not to preempt what the outcome of the IMD was. There may be a recommendation from you as exec member to make an adjustment within the process, which we wouldn't then have necessarily advised the member of the public about. So we generally wait till the IMD is complete. certainly, once we've had the objection period in, we set the IMD date and we produce the report in that period. We could try and produce it sooner in that period so that it was in the public domain. It would be released potentially sooner. But it really depends on, I guess, whether there would be any changes to it required prior to the meeting that officers felt necessary.
I just think if you're going to go back to the people who commented, if you're going to email them anyway, you could just attach the document and say, this gives you a bit more information, at least the text from it, that might help them a bit.
We did put out a number of communications through our comms team, from which this report was actually taken, the wording was taken, explaining what the changes being made were, and I think some of that went into press articles and so on. But we could certainly produce a kind of plain language description of what's going on, even through the notice of proposal or notice of intent that we publish prior to making the order. So,
but I think the issue is not everybody reads social media, not everybody reads the press.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you're going to go back to them, tell them as part of the process of going back the plain English version of what was going on, I think would help. So that's it from me. Does John Kaiser have any questions?
No, first of all, I'd just like to thank you for coming along, because, it helps when people, and there's obviously what the outturn of this is, we will look at whether or not it's possible and whether it makes sense to publish or to actually respond prior to the IMD. And the other thing, which I think really is important for everybody, we tend to get locked into council speak, and a lot of that is statutory speak, unfortunately, especially for notices and those sorts of things. But I think your advice is to make these things look clearer, and so people don't get concerned about it because they truly understand. I mean, there was one paragraph in here that's very, very clear, and it says, although it changes, the parking cost will remain the same for all the customers across all operational areas in the car park. And I think that's a very important point of this. But I thank you very much for coming along.
Yeah. Actually, it's really good.
Just before Paulie and I hand the decision sheet round to sign, did you want any notes added to the decision sheet? For example, a note about the what's been discussed today, sort of to do with that it's not a change to.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be useful. I think.
Okay. I've written some notes down, so I'll add just a couple of lines at the bottom, which just summarises sort of the key points that I think have been raised.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that as well, John?
Can you also correct the number of responses, the objections, because there actually are not 17, there's actually 16. Number 12 and number 13 are identical.
So 16 objections.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll make a note of that. I'll make a note about the difference between the charging period. Sorry, not that, but the fact that we're just making the car parks operational.
Yeah. And what that means.
That means. And shall I add in that officers will also go away and look at how to make the process more
easily understood?
Yeah.
I know Martin's shaking his head, but I think we've got to follow the statutory process. There's nothing to stop us adding a little bit as well, I think, unless it's impossible. Martin, you're muted.
No. What I was shaking my head about was the fact that we had 12 and 13 that were
I see
replicated in the. We try and keep these things clear, but you just.
Yeah, no, it's all right. It's all right. It's easy for me. I was just reading them.
But no, additional notes are welcomed on the decision sheet. Yeah.
I think the important thing with any of these documents is we have a note that goes with the official documents that says what this really means.
Yeah.
So it explains this does not mean your car parking charges will go up or anything will change in your car park. This document doesn't trigger any of that. Thank you.
Yeah, but it needs to say why we're doing it, because otherwise you might wonder, well, why are they doing it? It's yeah. And thank you for covering us, John. That's much appreciated.
That's fine, Pauline.
Isolation is a pain in the backside.
Yeah, I know.
So whilst Matt just finishes signing the decision sheet, just for the record, the decision which the recommendation set out on page 5, John has agreed to sign off parts 1 and 2, which is instructing officers to proceed with the making of the relevant off-street car park regulation orders and instructing officers to write to all objectors to advise them of this decision. So he's decided not to go with the or bit. So part 3 is not the decision. So subject to the standard 5-day call-in period, that decision will go live. And at this point, I will close the meeting. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you very much to the member of the public whose name I don't know.